Hello again, everybody. This is Derek, and I am coming back at you with another wargaming and miniature video. And in this video, we're going to continue on with our Land of the Free boot camp. And we have finally made it to shooting combat. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about shooting. Now, if you're interested in the introduction, orders, and commanders, you should go check the other videos. Let's get started with shooting combat. Gunpowder weapons dominated warfare during the growth of the colonial America. But the flintlock design was very temperamental and susceptible to malfunction. These could be an endless amount of reasons why the flintlock musket would fail to discharge, ranging from moisture on the flint or in the gunpowder to loose hammers. Officers would always ensure that the first volley a unit fired were the most effective because of the inconsistency of their weapons. Those first few shots, followed by a bayonet charge, were the standard operating procedure on the open battlefield during the 18th and 19th centuries. The dense landscape of North America made this tactic a little more challenging, so changes to strategy developed throughout the ages. There are 3 instances during the game when an element may shoot. The first instance is an element may fire a volley is any time during its activation. The element may also fire if it stored a combat order and will like to conduct a snap fire. And the final instance when an element may shoot is if it declares a closing fire as a charge reaction. An element may fire as many times as it has combat orders, but an element must spend a maneuver order to reload each time after firing an order to continue to shoot. Once an element has completed its actions, but it has not used all of its combat orders, the element may store one combat order to anticipate the need for a future snap fire, as long as it has loaded weapons. Mark the element with some type of counter to reflect the element has an opportunity to snap fire until it is activated in the following turn. If the element has no remaining combat orders, it can be issued a wait for my command special order as long as the commander has remaining command points. The shooting sequence. The sequence for properly firing an element should be strictly followed and is used in all 3 instances when an element can shoot. Okay. Check arc and line of sight. Okay, so we know the arc of fire is 45 degrees extended from the ends of the element. He's shooting there, so we know he's good. If I wanted to shoot there, I could, because the arc of sight goes along that line there, and that unit is inside my arc of sight. And I can draw a line from my leader stand, any edge of my leader stand, to that element, so that would be the range. Determine threat and declare target. Check range, turn to face, check firing lane for friendly elements, and fire. Okay, so there's quite a bit that you need to do. All of it becomes second nature once you start firing. Check arc and line of sight. An element's line of sight is always measured from the leader to any point of the target's element. This line of sight must fall within the arc of sight in order for a target to be considered valid. A straight line is extended from the leader to the target. If that straight line is uninterrupted, then a clear line of sight can be determined. Like from there to there. Well, they are behind a fence. Okay, determining threat and declare target. Officers can be impetuous when issuing an order to fire, and elements may discharge their weapons before the enemy moves to within effective range. For this reason, players can pre-measure the distance and determine their target once the range has been established. Elements will always select the most threatening target, so players will need to adhere to these rules below when determining a legal target. The closest and most visible target with the most stands within the threat zone of the shooting element must be the target of shooting. Now, as you know, the threat zone is a 12-inch line extended straight from the ends of the unit. That unit is inside the threat zone, so he must be the target. Even though this guy might be a little closer, he's not in my threat zone. If there are no targets within the element threat zone, then the player may select the closest visible target with the most stands to the shooting element's arc of sight. So if he wasn't there, I could choose them. If there is more than one target that fulfills this requirement, then the shooting element will always shoot at the most visible target, followed by the larger sized element. If both targets are in the open and the same size, then the active player can select. Check range. Range is determined in exactly the same way as checking for line of sight, but players may want to measure from the leader of the element to the closest point of the target element. If the value is in inches equal to or under the range of the weapon, then the element can attempt to shoot. If it's out of range, the element will hold its fire and will not fire. Okay. Turn to face. The firing element's leader will rotate on the spot so that a portion of the target element will fall within the leader's threat zone. Once the leader has rotated to place the target element within its threat zone, the remaining stands of the shooting element will realign. This is a free movement and does not require the expenditure of a movement action. If there is an instance when the shooting element rotates into another element or into some type of terrain, then the element will only rotate far enough to satisfy the conditions of putting the target element into the leader's threat zone without moving into the other hindrances. This movement could cause the shooting element to rotate into an enemy's threat zone, causing a snapfire. If the snapfire action does occur, then it will be conducted after the activation element fires. Okay, so let's hypothetically, examply, let's say my element is there, right? If I check my arc of sight, he's within arc of sight. He's also within range. What I would do is I would pivot this unit centered on the leader so that the leader's threat zone, and we'll use this ruler, the threat zone is measured from the leader's base edges, not the unit, straight out. And it has to be, or he gets a free rotation to rotate to where now that unit is within the leader's personalized threat zone. Now we check firing lane for friendly elements. Okay, this is something I haven't seen in any other game system, and I think it's really interesting. If there was an enemy here that I was planning on shooting at, but imagine this being a friendly element, right? Imagine this being continental. And I wanted to shoot at them. The weapons of the 18th century and early 19th century were not incredibly accurate, so friendly troops and officers would take care to watch their shooting and would often maneuver themselves carefully to avoid mishaps. Players will need to check the shooting element's fire zone in order to determine if an enemy element are at risk of being hit. The fire zone is exactly the same as the threat zone, but extends to the weapon's range. So if the rifleman, it would extend 18 inches. Players will need to check the shooting element's fire zone in order to determine if any friendly elements are at risk of being hit. The fire zone is okay. If any friendly elements are within the fire zone, hypothetically, let's say they were friendly, they are within the fire zone, then the shooting element cannot fire. Even if opposing elements are completely blocking friendly elements from the shooting, the firing element will hold fire and not risk friendly casualties. Elements may not fire into a melee combat because of the danger of hurting friendly troops. Okay, so you can't just shoot there when the bullets stop, right? A lot of them will miss and will continue on. And in that case, you might hit your friends that are in behind. So they can't fire. It's not a player choice, and it's not a chance of hitting the second guys. It's the game rules say, no shoot, no can do. Okay, fire. Once the player has established which target you will be shooting, a combat order is removed from the active element. Elements that have declared a closing fire as a charge reaction do not spend a combat order to fire. When the element fires, place a marker or smoke cloud next to or front of the element represent that it has fired. Like so. The player will create a pool of dice starting with 2 dice and adding the element's action value along with any shooting modifiers. So if you remember our unit stat, a medium infantry element has action dice of 4. So we add 4 more dice. Once the pool has been generated, the player will roll the dice looking for 5s and 6s. Shooting modifiers. Target in cover is -1 die, right? If they're in cover, you -1 die. If they're in open order, you minus a die. So like if they're skirmishing. If they're long range, over 12 inches. Well, a musket doesn't have a long range, but a rifle would because it goes 12 and then 18. Target is point blank. So if you're within 3 inches, you add a die. Target is being shot in the flank. You add a die. For each disorder marker on the shooting element, you -1 die. And if you fire grape shot from artillery, you add 2 dice. Okay, so let's talk about each of those modifiers. Target in open order. Okay, well, you know what that is. Target is at long range. It's over 12 inches. Okay, we got that. Target is at point blank. 3 inches. We got that. Target in cover. The leader of the shooting element must be able to draw a clear line of sight to the entire element, but the enemy may have stands not clearly visible to the shooting element. If the shooting element's leader can draw a clear line of sight to all the target stands, then the element is considered to be an open. If at least half of the target element's stands, including the leader, are blocked by obstacles, terrain, elements that block line of sight, or the target's stands are outside of the shooting element's arc of sight, then the target element is considered to be in cover. Elements in cover reduce the die by 1. If the shooting element's leader cannot draw a clear line of sight to any of the target's stands, then it is considered to be blocked and cannot shoot. So here's an example. The active element has a clear line of sight to enemy element A because at least half of the element is not blocked. But element B is blocked because you're shooting at less than half. Okay, target being shot in the flank. An element is considered to be shooting the flank if at least half of the shooting element and its leader are completely within the target's flank. So if the leader is only partially in the flank, it's still considered a front shot. And then for every disorder marker, you lose a die. Dice pools of 0 and below. When players participate in small-scale games, there may be instances after the modifiers have been applied when the shooting die pool reaches 0 or below. If this is the case, then the shooting element will always roll 1d6, but will be required to roll a 6 rather than a 5 or a 6. Okay, so you can still shoot if you have no dice, but instead of rolling a 5, you're looking for a 6. Okay, so this element is going to shoot over there. Everybody starts with 2 dice. That's the default. And because it's a medium infantry element, it's going to add 4 dice. But because they're in cover, we're going to take one of these dice off. So I get a 5-die roll. And I'm looking for 5s and 6s, right? So I would have gotten 1 hit. There's it. I marked it with a ring. Split fire and firing at multiple targets. An element cannot split its fire during a single shooting order, but an element can fire at multiple elements throughout its activation as long as it adheres to the targeting rules above. Conditions on the battlefield may change from one order of shooting to another, and officers are competent enough to recognize new targets of opportunity. If there is a target element that satisfied all the same conditions, allowing the player to choose, then the player may choose one combat order to fire at one element and use another combat order to fire at a different element. You choose a target per order. You don't get to split during the same order. So if they're given an order, they all choose the same element. But I could give myself another order and fire at a different element if it presented itself. But it would require a second order. Okay, so there is ragged and punishing volleys. An element that fires and rolls 2 or more 1s must subtract 1 hit from its roll. If there are no hits, then the ragged volley has no further effect. So if I rolled a 5 and 2 1s, hypothetically, let's say I rolled that, then I would not cause this hit. Those 2 1s cancel out this hit. If a punishing volley, if the shooting element rolls 2 or more 6s during one combat order, then the target element will receive a disorder marker as well as the hits. Okay, so let's say I roll that. Well, that is 3 hits roll 2 6s and a 5, that still would be 3 hits, right? So he would have taken 3 hits and a disorder. Now, if you happen to roll 2 or more 1s and 2 or more 6s, then the effects cancel each other out. Okay, weapons and ranges. Armies serving in North America during the colonial period have certain weapons and ranges. Okay, so if you look at this little chart here, we got smoothbore musket, 12-inch, rifled musket, 18-inch, mixed weapons, 6 inches, artillery up to 12 pounds, well, including 12 pounds, 36 inches, artillery greater than 12 pounds, 48, mortars 12 to 36, so that means they have a minimum range. You can't be within 12, and rockets, War of 1812 only, 12 inches. I think a howitzer might fall within the siege mortar range, but it could be artillery. It just depends. Okay, artillery. They're a little special. They have solid shot, grape shot. So solid shot. Each time an artillery element uses a combat order to fire over 12 inches, a solid shot ball will be used. If the shooting action causes any hits to the target element, then the target element will also receive a disorder. Solid shot penetration. When artillery is firing solid shot and a 6 is rolled to hit, then the player may roll another die to hit. The player may continue to roll another die as long as a 6 is rolled. Add up the total number of hits, including the new dice. If the player is required to roll a 6 to hit after all modifiers, then it will still count as a penetrating hit. So like if you reduce it to 0 dice, he still gets to roll 1 needing a 6, but now that he's got the 6, he gets to re-roll another die. Raking fire. If the artillery element is firing solid shot into the flank of a target element, then a solid shot penetration will be awarded on a 5 or a 6 rather than just a 6. So basically every hit is an extra die roll. Grape shot. When an enemy element is within 12 inches of an artillery element, then the artillery element may fire grape shot instead of solid shot. Each time a combat order is used to fire an artillery element, if it is hit by grape shot, it receives a disorder marker. Okay, here's the rub. If you're within 12, you may choose to fire grape shot, which gives you 2 extra dice, but no penetration. But if you roll solid shot, you don't add the extra 2 dice, but you get the exploding 6. I think the 2 extra dice would be better, because it's like 2 automatic exploding dice. My opinion. Switching ammunition. An artillery element may switch ammunition each time it fires, taking into consideration that the officer will call out the type of ammunition needed during the reload part of their maneuvering order sequence. The artillery element must announce which type of ammunition it is firing before rolling the dice. So you don't have to declare, I'm reloading grape shot or I'm reloading solid shot. You just do your normal reload, pick the smoke up, now they're reloaded, so the next time you fire, you just say, hey, I'm going to use grape shot. Okay, targets of opportunity. Artillery pieces will always follow the target declaration rules when enemy elements are within the artillery element's threat zone. Artillery may ignore the closest target rule as long as there are no enemy elements within its threat zone. If there are no enemy elements within its threat zone, it may choose to fire at any element as long as the rest of the shooting rules are followed. Okay. Mortars. Mortars are a variant of artillery that has a different set of shooting rules, but has the same stats as an artillery element. Mortar artillery elements may target an enemy within their arc of sight, as long as the leader can draw a line of sight to the target. When a mortar artillery element is shooting, it never suffers a penalty for the target element being in cover, so it goes over the cover. For each combat order that a mortar artillery element uses to shoot at its target, it will cause a disorder marker. Mortars cannot target any element within 12 inches, and may not target enemy elements if friendly elements are within 6 inches of the target. To determine if a friendly element is within 6 inches of the enemy target, the player will measure from any part of the friendly element to the closest part of the enemy element. Well, that's kind of limiting. You got to make sure no friendly is within 6 inches. And then rockets, unpredictable. Rockets on the battlefield make them more of a distraction. A rocket artillery element is an artillery element, but does not follow the same rules. Rocket artillery element may target any enemy within arc of sight. Rocket artillery elements cannot target elements within 12 inches, may not target enemy within 6 inches of a friendly. The friendly element is close part of the enemy. For each rocket attack die that hits, it causes a disorder marker rather than a hit. Okay, so rockets only cause disorder. They're more of a nuisance, like they said. They don't cause hits. Well, that kind of sucks in a way, because pretty much artillery already caused disorder. Okay, shooting results. Each time an element uses a combat order to shoot, the hits are immediately applied to the target element. If the target element suffers hits equal to or higher than its discipline rating, then the element will be forced to make a discipline morale test. A discipline morale test with appropriate modifiers will be conducted immediately following the application of the hits. If the test is failed, the element will conduct an orderly withdrawal towards its own player's table edge. And if it is passed, the element will remain in place with the capabilities of continuing to fight. When an element fails a discipline test because of the hits it suffers during shooting, it will withdraw to the straightest path towards the player's table edge. The element will retire in good order, allowing the withdrawing element to continue to face the shooting element when its movement is complete. When the element withdraws, it will turn for free, facing its table edge, and then retire a D3 towards the player's table edge. When its movement is complete, the withdrawing element will conduct a free turn to face the shooting element in the same manner. If this artillery fires at them, causing enough hits, according to its discipline, let's say it has a 3 discipline, and I do 3 hits, and I roll on my morale and I fail, I have to withdraw. I take a D3, which luckily I have a D3. I roll a D3, and I have a 3. So now, what I will do is I will take these end units off, these end bases, just for now. This guy will turn in place towards his friendly table edge, which is this. The turn is free, and then I will move my 3 inches for a move, times 3. So I'll move a total of 9 inches. Basically, it says it'll use 3 maneuver actions. So if the first action is 3, that'll get me in contact with the obstacle. Then I will take 1 action to cross the obstacle, and then 1 action to move again, and then I will turn and face the artillery, placing these guys back. I think that would be a problem, because those guys didn't disappear. Well, they did follow along in march column, so yeah, I don't think I'm supposed to use march column movement. It just, I don't know. Because if I'm here, technically, they all turn. I was just picking up the bases to make it easier to move. But technically, they all turn for free. And now I'm in a march column. So movement would be 6 in a march column. So I would spend 1 action to get to the fence and stop. And then because I'm in a march column, I have to spend 2 actions to get to the other side of the fence. And then I would turn to face the artillery. It's a lot of moving and shuffling. So I would wind up being there. If the withdrawing element moves through or comes into contact with friendly or enemy elements, then it follows those appropriate rules. If the withdrawing element comes into contact with any scenery or linear obstacles, then it will follow the appropriate rules. Once the element has completed its withdrawal, the player will remove all of its hits and downgrade its discipline to the next level. If the withdrawing element is an active element, then once it has removed its hits and lowered its discipline level, it will end its activation. Any remaining maneuver or combat orders are lost, and it may not store anything for a future snapfire or countercharge. Okay, so the way this is written is, if it passes its morale test, it doesn't move. It just remains stationary. Okay. But having taken enough hits to downgrade it, I would think would downgrade it. Because it's not just going to sit there with a bunch of hits on it that equal its discipline. Because it does say the discipline test is made immediately after the hits are applied. So if he's got a 3 discipline and I shoot him with 3 hits, I'll go ahead and remove the 3 hits, downgrade him, and pass a discipline test to see if he has to withdraw. All right, well, that was shooting. It's pretty straightforward. All this maneuvering and adjusting and shifting and juggling, you don't really need to worry about all that. It's a case-by-case basis. But the general rule of thumb is you immediately turn to get your leader threat within the target element, overlap the target element. You get 2 dice to start with, plus your unit's dice to roll, minus any modifiers like cover. Then you roll, and you're looking for 5s and 6s. Now, hypothetically, we're going to do an example real quick. If I have 3 combat orders and 3 maneuver orders, I would declare a shot, marking that they have fired, roll my 5 dice, causing 4 hits and a disorder. Where's my disorder? 4 hits and a disorder. Now, 3 hits is all that is required to reduce them to shaken. So I mark them with a yellow to represent shaken. I remove these 3 hits. Oh, actually, I'm going to remove all 4 hits. But because I have an excess of 1, I get a -1 to my morale test. So I roll 2 dice, trying to get higher than what I need for my morale. Okay, Snake Eyes, that sucks. But let's just say I pass. All the hits are gone. Because you don't... Once you reduce the quality level, the hits disappear. And then I use my maneuver to remove this, and then I use my shooting to shoot again. I got 1 hit, which does not cause any kind of morale because he has a 3. Then I maneuver and I shoot again for the 3rd time, getting 1 more hit, and then I maneuver, taking this off. So that was my 3 maneuvers and 3 fires. Now, if he had failed that first attack, if he failed his morale, he would have retreated to over here, remember? Or you roll a d3 to determine how many maneuvers he gets. But hypothetically, if I moved over here, now he has more actions. He could have changed his shooting to over here. Alright guys, that's the end of shooting. Pretty self-explanatory. In the next episode, what we're going to do is touch on melees. And so these videos are coming out like every 3 or 4 days. Keep your eyes open. And eventually we'll get through the entire book and learn how to play Land of the Free. Alright, I'll catch you in the next one.